Nova. Probably a frame you've heard of a lot, because she's one of the more popular frames. However, I do believe that not many people cover, like, all of her, I guess you could say, tech that she has, and what a frame she is when it comes to that, because Molecular Prime is one of the buggiest abilities in the game, and I'm going to show literally every interaction with it that I've found. I'll show Null Star and a Antimatter drop build, but it's mostly just going to be focused on Molecular Prime, so yeah. Let's get into it, I guess. So Null Star is a really simple ability. Like, in essence, it gives you more particle scaling with your duration stat, which will deal damage upon hitting enemies, and the more stars you have, the more damage reduction you have. It's pretty simple, but it's also a really strong ability when used correctly. For example, if you use it with crit buffs, such as Arcane Avenger to give it crit chance, Tenacious Bond to give it crit damage, because it starts with no crit chance or crit damage, and then you give it Neutron Star for the augment, and add on some strength, good amount of range, you will pretty much have a really high damage setup. Also add Vigorous Swap and Arcane Arachne for more damage buffs if you wish. And so we get to the second ability, which is Antimatter Drop. Now, this ability is pretty good for a nuke, I won't even lie. Now, we don't use it at all on our main Molecular Prime setups because it's already nuking. We don't need another nuke. But this one's pretty serviceable on its own, or I guess, with things that it takes advantage of, such as like Sickening Pulse will be able to make it a 10-stack blast explosion, which you will see in the clip later. So we'll use that. Charge it quickly with a shotgun, like the Cedar or the Heck are pretty good options, or the Felarx. You can also use an Antimatter Absorb, which will give the enemies, like, their bullets will fuel your Antimatter Drop, which makes it a nuke that they charge, I suppose. So yeah, it's pretty good. That's about it for the second ability there. Woo, Wormhole. There is literally fuck all to explain here. It's a movement ability that gets you to point A, or from point A to point B. You can also get the drones and bounties from point A to point B. Well, rip my vocal cords, it's time for Molecular Prime. So, it's a wildcard ability. It counts as whatever was used to kill while it's, like, inside the Molecular Prime. So say it's a companion weapon, a melee pistol, or a dagger. If you kill inside Molecular Prime, it will count as that weapon type for all of the explosions around them. At face value, this can seem like fine, pre-mid damage, etc., but when you dig deeper into like the ability and all, it's kind of limitless. It's really good. So, there's weapon-based interactions. For example, it will take some mods on your weapons. So, acid shells, which are percentage-based HP mods. If you put enough into the multipliers, you can just make it one-tap entire crowds pretty much, up to the cap because it's percentage HP. The range of the augments will also inherit the range of Molecular Prime. So now a 6 meter range augment with Jack Attack is like 26 meters with max range. So that's kind of insane. It also works with 10 Tron, of course. So yeah, Jack Attack, because of the interaction, is one of the strongest melee users of Nova. The other melee things it can trigger is Furix's Amalgam mod, which means, you know, you'll prime the entire room with Blast. It kind of lags your game a bit. It can trigger Winds of Purity, but who the fuck gives a fuck about Winds of Purity as well? And then another notable mention is Amalgam Organic Metal Auger, which I'm sure you've seen multiple times before. It will just, like a Molecular Prime to armor strip. When it's used with melee influence, it's just insane. So yeah. Another thing you can do with Molecular Prime is take pretty much any ability that gives extra damage. So like Zata's Whisper, Toxic Lash, Resupply, and just give it to Molecular Prime. So you can use Sight Spectres for Resupply, but obviously Toxic Lash you have to be Siren. So another thing then, Molecular Prime can inherit some Incarnon evolutions. So Devouring Attrition, right, will give you 21 times damage, which on a quadratic scaling explosion, you know, this may seem like better than everything else, and it's really good, but melee influence exists. And basically, you know what melee influence does by now. When it's active, it causes every melee weapon hit to spread statuses on the enemy to all enemies in like 21 meters. Molecular Prime counts as a melee hit, so it will take the blast procs that trigger on an enemy and just spread it to all enemies within 21 meters. Which on a 26 meter AoE means you'll 10 stack blast proc the entire room, which is kind of insane for quadratic scaling. Not only is the ability itself quadratic scaling, but so is blast. So yeah, use Nautilus for the grouping, and that's pretty much it. Time we got to the crazy shit. So the first Incarnon that I will mention is the Dual Ichor. This thing is particularly strong with melee influence on Molecular Prime because of what the Incarnon does. So the Incarnon will basically any melee kill you do will create a pool on the ground, which will inherit the elements on your weapon and proc them at a fixed 50% status chance. So 50% status chance is just like, it can be like modified at all with status chance, the Incarnon buffs at all, and it cannot crit and will not be able to crit with Avenger or any flat CC, so there's no point using Avenger or Tenacious Bond. Covenant from Hera I'm not sure, but I'm not gonna test that. So Molecular Prime kills, if you kill with Dual Ichor, will count as Dual Ichor kills and therefore drop a pool on the ground. So put short, if you have melee influence active, it will spread all of the Dual Ichor's statuses through Molecular Prime hits, as is dropping the Ichor clouds, which will then spread by influence. And it has insane synergy with Dual Ichor as a dual nuke setup, which you will see now. The other dual nuke is the Okina Incarnon with Molecular Prime and Evade / Zata's Whisper, depending on the tile set, of course. I'd recommend Evade on Orokin, Infested in Corpus, and for Grineer I would recommend you just, you know, go for Zata's Whisper. You would go Evade. Now, you do, like, lose the additional damage instance and overguard generation, but you get 8 times stealth multiplier and immortality because you're invisible. And it also opens up your other arcane slot, so you can add Arcane Ice Storm instead of Arcane Aegis, which is super good. It can make all of your stats from duration, range, and strength go to 260. So yeah, very good. It's a stat monster. Now, another thing that this Incarnon method is your Okina daggers will proc influence, meaning that it just automates your melee influence, like procs and chains. It will not be able to benefit from it on its own though, so Molecular Prime is the only benefactor for influence. And another thing is, with Molecular Prime existing, it will cause the Okina daggers to chain upon themselves. Usually Okina daggers can't respawn from their own kills, but with Molecular Prime it can. So yeah, it's one of the best setups. It's self-sustaining and can get KPM up to 300, which is insane, and I will show you that now actually.
Just dropped dead on
Okay, I'm sure you noticed in the Each Or showcase we shot the amp and it procced influence. So yeah, basically that's the Phahd amp, and it's very broken on Nova. Because why not? Phahd will taxi some of your melee effects onto your projectile basically, and some effects will just be molecular prime explosion exclusive. Let me explain. So, Phahd is a bouncing glyph-like projectile, and the projectile itself can take Spinner X passive, it can spawn Okina daggers, and it can spawn each your pulls on kill. Molecular Prime will take some melee weapon augments too, and so will Phahd, namely Burning Hate. If you have a way to spread heat literally everywhere. Which you do because you have Neutron Star. So now your Phahd has a 120% status vulnerability as long as one enemy dies. Actually no, it just always has the vulnerability. So if you use Raw, you kind of just blow enemies up. To craft the amp you will need the Rat Black Prism, the Phahd Scaffold, and the Lore Embrace. So not only does it take Spinner X, Okina, Dual Eachor, and Hate's effects, it also will take stuff like Synod Heliocore and Secure Elector through Molecular Prime, and it will also take armor stripping effects like Amalgam, Arganic Metal, all go through Molecular Prime, which I will showcase. Oh yeah, how could I forget to mention it also procs Pack Seeker for whatever fucking reason, so yeah. And also Fortifier, but you probably already saw that. Away from the taxi and onto the wheelchair. So basically, Spinner X wheelchair, and honestly, hate wheelchair as well, but I didn't get a clip of that. Basically is when you use Cold Elemental Ward with a Dirica to proc Influence to passively prime enemies with melee effects via Cold Elemental Ward. Because what Cold Elemental Ward will do is when Influence is active, it will spread cold to everyone through Influence. And those influenced hits are melee hits, meaning they're primed for the melee passive on hit, which is Spinner X and Incarnon, which I will showcase now. My oh my, these abilities are fucking dumb. So Xatus is a damage buff and Cold Elemental Ward is purely for survivability and passive melee priming. But they both make you immortal against overguarded enemies, as you can see. Okay, we're at the home stretch, buddy. So, the builds. I'm just gonna show every single one of them now. Have fun, peeps.